Jacob and Lisa Reed had been searching for the perfect home for months, and when they finally found the small, weathered house tucked into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, they felt their luck had finally changed. The house wasn't new, far from it, but it had character: tall windows framed by cracked paint, creaky wooden floors, and a basement that Jacob immediately pictured transforming into his dream workshop. The realtor was hesitant to share much about the previous owner, an elderly man named Mr. Whitmore, who had sold the house shortly before passing away under somewhat mysterious circumstances. But Jacob and Lisa, eager to start their life together, brushed aside the vague warnings as old realtor cliches. The first few days were filled with the usual chaos of moving, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and trying to tame the wild garden in the back. But at night, Lisa began to notice strange things happening around the house, especially in the basement. At first, it was subtle: an odd creak, a distant thud, the faintest whisper echoing from below. When she told Jacob, he laughed it off as the natural sounds of an old house settling, or the wind sneaking through cracks. Then, on their third night, everything changed. Jacob was downstairs organizing his tools, setting up the workspace he'd dreamed of since buying the house. Lisa was upstairs, reading in bed, when she suddenly heard his voice cut through the silence, sharp and urgent. "Did you hear that?" she called out, but Jacob was silent for a moment, then replied nervously, "Rent's due." Lisa's heart skipped. "What?" she asked, confused. "Rent's due," he repeated, voice strained and low. "Someone's down here." But when Lisa hurried downstairs, the basement was empty, except for the thick, icy cold that seemed to cling to the walls. Over the next few nights, the voice returned, each time more insistent. "Rent's due. Pay up. You're trespassing." Lisa and Jacob would find tools knocked over, strange scratches on the workbench, and sometimes an old leather-bound ledger left open on the floor, its pages yellowed and worn, but filled with neat handwriting and faded ink. Jacob began researching the house's past, desperate to find answers. He learned that Mr. Whitmore had been the sole occupant of the basement for years, refusing to leave even after the house changed hands. Local whispers spoke of a man obsessed with the idea of rent and possession, a man so tied to the property he could not rest. One evening, Lisa awoke to the unmistakable sound of slow footsteps descending the basement stairs. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and a chill swept into the room. She grabbed Jacob, shaking him awake just as the voice echoed through the house, "Rent's due. Pay now." They rushed to the basement together, only to find a shadowy figure standing near the workbench, a gaunt old man with hollow eyes and a sinister sneer. The air around him was thick with decay, and the temperature dropped sharply. Jacob tried to speak to the apparition, asking what it wanted, but the ghost merely snarled, "You owe. You pay." The spirit seemed tethered to the basement by anger and greed, refusing to let anyone claim the space without paying his price. Lisa tried to reach out with compassion, whispering his name, hoping to calm the restless soul, but the ghost vanished with a rattling groan, leaving behind a freezing silence. They sought help from a local spiritual medium named Evelyn, who came with sage, holy water, and prayers. The cleansing ritual was harrowing. The ghost fought back fiercely, banging pipes, smashing tools, and making the house tremble with rage. Evelyn explained that Whitmore's obsession had bound his spirit tightly to the basement, and only by acknowledging his torment and offering him release could they find peace. They performed a ceremony, reading passages and leaving offerings of old coins and notes, symbolic payments meant to satisfy the dead tenant's demands. For a while, it seemed to work. The basement remained silent, and the oppressive chill lifted. Jacob set up his workshop without interruption, and Lisa no longer felt watched. But the reprieve was short-lived. One night, Lisa awoke to the basement door slowly creaking open again. She heard footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate, descending the stairs. The voice was back, colder and more menacing than ever, "Rent's due." This time, the haunting escalated. Lights flickered violently, shadows danced on the walls, and objects began moving on their own. An ancient ledger appeared on the workbench, its pages flipping wildly, stopping on a list of names, all previous owners and renters, each with a due date and unpaid balance scrawled beside them. Lisa shuddered as she recognized the name Reed at the bottom, marked in fresh red ink. Jacob and Lisa realized they were caught in a curse. Whitmore's spirit was bound to the basement, endlessly demanding rent from the living. The house wasn't just haunted, it was a prison where debts must be paid forever, trapping anyone who dared claim the space. Desperation drove them to research old newspapers and town records, uncovering a history of tenants who vanished under mysterious circumstances, their disappearances marked by reports of strange sounds and eerie shadows around the house. As the nights grew darker, the spirit's presence became more violent. Lisa found herself waking in cold sweats, feeling invisible hands gripping her arms. Jacob's tools would fly off tables during his work, and unexplained scratches marred the walls. They tried everything, from holy water to salt lines, but the entity was relentless. One fateful night, the basement door slammed open with a force that rattled the entire house. Jacob and Lisa stood frozen as a ghostly figure emerged from the shadows, Whitmore himself, his face twisted with rage and sorrow, a spectral landlord demanding his due. The room filled with whispers of unpaid rent, lost years, and broken promises. "You owe," he hissed, voice like dry leaves scraping. "Pay or join me." Panic surged through them. They realized the only way to escape was to settle the debt, a symbolic payment to break the curse. With trembling hands, Lisa placed a stack of old bills and coins on the workbench and recited a plea for forgiveness and release. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then, Whitmore's figure flickered and dissolved, the house falling into an eerie silence. In the following days, the oppressive feeling lifted. The basement felt warm, inviting even, and the strange noises stopped. Jacob finally set up his workshop without fear, and Lisa felt safe in their home once more. But sometimes, late at night, Lisa hears the soft creak of the basement door, and a voice just barely audible whispers, "Rent's due." And she wonders if some debts are never truly paid. When Sarah and Michael Collins moved into their quaint Victorian home in Salem, Massachusetts, they thought they had finally escaped the chaos of city life. The house was a beautiful relic from the late 1800s, complete with ornate woodwork, tall ceilings, and original hardwood floors. Despite its charm, the house held an eerie reputation among locals, a history whispered quietly in town about a tragic event long buried in the past. But Sarah and Michael dismissed the stories as superstition. They were more than ready to start their new life in the peaceful neighborhood. From the very first night, however, something about the house unsettled Sarah. Noises crept through the walls, whispers, creaks, and the unmistakable groan of old floorboards settling. But the most disturbing was the dark stains that began to appear on the floorboards in their bedroom. At first, Sarah thought it was a trick of the light or maybe some old water damage. But every morning when she woke, she found patches of dark, almost black stains spread across the polished wood. The stains seemed to pulse with a life of their own, impossible to scrub away no matter how hard she tried. Michael, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as residue from spilled drinks or dirt tracked in. But Sarah knew better. The strange stains always reappeared precisely at 3:07 a.m. every night. It became an obsession for Sarah. She would stay awake, eyes fixed on the floor, watching the clock tick toward that exact minute. As the hour approached, a cold chill would seep into the room, the air growing heavy and thick. Then, as the clock struck 3:07, the dark patches would bleed back onto the floorboards, spreading like fresh blood soaking into wood grain. Sometimes, faint whispers would accompany the appearance of the stains, indecipherable voices murmuring just beyond hearing. Terrified but determined to uncover the truth, Sarah began researching the history of their home. What she discovered was chilling. The house had once belonged to a man named Elijah Crane, a local known for his violent temper and cruel nature. In 1894, he was accused of murdering his wife, Mary, in a fit of rage. According to town records, Mary had been found dead in the very bedroom Sarah and Michael now slept in, her blood soaking into the floorboards beneath the old hardwood. Elijah had vanished shortly after, and the house stood empty for years, its walls absorbing the sorrow and rage that lingered. One evening, Sarah confided in their neighbor, Mrs. Harper, a frail woman with piercing eyes who had lived in the neighborhood all her life. Mrs. Harper's voice dropped when she told Sarah that Elijah's spirit was said to haunt the house, cursed to relive his crime each night. The blood stains were his guilt made manifest, a grim reminder that no matter how much the past was scrubbed away, some sins never fade. Determined to stop the nightly terror, Sarah called in a local paranormal investigator, Marcus. He arrived with an array of equipment, EMF meters, infrared cameras, and audio recorders, ready to confront whatever haunted the floorboards. That night, Sarah and Michael stayed awake with Marcus, watching as the clock crept toward 3:07 a.m. As the minute arrived, the temperature plummeted, breath visible in the air. The floorboards beneath their feet began to seep dark liquid, thick and viscous, pooling in twisted shapes. The EMF meters spiked wildly, and the audio recorders captured faint, anguished cries and frantic footsteps pacing the room. Then, suddenly, the shadow of a man appeared in the corner, a gaunt figure with wild eyes and a face twisted by rage and regret. Marcus began chanting prayers and burning sage, the smoke swirling around the apparition. The shadow recoiled, shrieking, before vanishing into thin air. The blood stains faded, leaving the floor clean once more. Exhausted but hopeful, Sarah and Michael felt a brief relief. But the next night, at exactly 3:07 a.m., the stains returned. Realizing the spirit's grip on the house was stronger than any ritual, Sarah delved deeper into Elijah Crane's past. She discovered that before the murder, Elijah had hidden a small wooden box beneath the floorboards, a box containing a token of Mary's love, something he believed would protect the house from harm. The box had never been found. Determined to break the curse, Sarah and Marcus pried up the warped floorboards, uncovering a hidden cavity. Inside lay the box, its wood blackened with age but intact. When opened, it revealed a locket engraved with Mary's initials and a faded, yellowed letter begging Elijah to seek forgiveness and change his ways. That night, Sarah placed the locket and letter on the mantel and waited as 3:07 a.m. approached. The air grew cold and heavy again, but this time the dark stains never appeared. Instead, a soft sigh seemed to ripple through the room, as if the house itself was exhaling relief. Days passed without incident, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Sarah and Michael finally felt at peace in their home. But sometimes, when the clock ticks close to 3:07, Sarah catches a fleeting shadow at the corner of her eye, a silent reminder that some darkness never fully fades away. When Emma and her friends first heard about the old Blackwood house on the outskirts of Cedar Falls, Iowa, it was nothing more than a local legend, one of those creepy stories whispered at parties or around campfires. The house was infamous for swallowing people whole. Over the past 50 years, several curious visitors had entered the crumbling mansion and simply vanished, their disappearances leaving no clues except the faintest echoes of screams trapped within the walls. Despite the warnings, Emma, an adventurous college student with a passion for urban exploration, saw the Blackwood house as the perfect challenge, an opportunity to document what might be the most terrifying place in her state. She convinced her 3 closest friends, Mark, Lisa, and Jason, to join her on a weekend trip to explore the mansion and uncover its secrets. The house sat deep in the woods, hidden by overgrown trees and thick vines that clawed at its rotting exterior. From a distance, it looked like a grotesque skeleton of its former self, with broken windows staring like dead eyes and shutters hanging crookedly. Even the air around it seemed thick, heavy with something rotten and oppressive. Their first night inside was a mixture of excitement and unease. The floorboards creaked underfoot, and every gust of wind sent eerie whistles through the cracked walls. The house's interior was a maze of narrow hallways, endless doors, and staircases that led to darkness. Emma set up her camera gear to record everything, hoping to catch evidence of paranormal activity. They joked nervously about the rumors, but none of them wanted to admit the growing feeling of dread in their stomachs. It started with small things. Lisa swore she heard footsteps behind her when no one was there. Jason felt cold spots in the hallway, breath visible in the stale air. Mark found strange scratches etched into the wood paneling, jagged and fresh, as if some desperate claw had scraped to escape. But the most terrifying moment came when Emma suddenly disappeared. They had been exploring the second floor when Emma stepped into a narrow room at the end of the hallway. The door slammed shut behind her with a violent bang. Mark and Lisa tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. They called her name, but only silence answered. Jason tried to look through a cracked window in the door but saw nothing. Then, suddenly, a low, guttural sound echoed, a wet, sucking noise coming from the very walls themselves. Panic set in. Mark and Lisa pounded on the door, screaming for Emma to come back. Seconds later, the wall beside the door rippled like liquid, and in a horrifying instant, it split open, an immense mouth with rows of jagged, slimy teeth. Before anyone could react, the mouth lunged out, grabbing Emma by the arm and pulling her inside. Her screams were muffled as she was swallowed whole, the wall closing back up as if nothing had happened. Jason's face went pale. "We have to get out of here," he stammered. But Mark was frozen, staring at the spot where Emma had vanished. Desperate, Lisa searched for another way to open the door, finding a hidden latch in the molding. The door swung open and Emma was gone without a trace. No signs of struggle, no blood, only the faintest imprint of her hand on the cold wood. It was as if the house had devoured her whole. That night, none of them slept. The house groaned and whispered, the walls seeming to pulse with hunger. Emma's camera, left on the floor, recorded a chilling final message, a distorted whisper barely audible, "Don't stay." The next morning, the remaining three decided to leave, but the house wasn't ready to let them go. As they gathered their things, the layout seemed to shift. Hallways twisted in impossible directions, doors led to rooms that weren't there before, and the exit they'd come through vanished. Panic turned to terror as the walls closed in, closing off their escape. Mark tried breaking windows, but they shattered to reveal only endless darkness beyond. Lisa screamed when the wall beside her suddenly opened again, revealing another monstrous mouth. It lunged at Jason, dragging him screaming inside before slamming shut. Now, Mark and Lisa were alone. Together, they frantically searched for any way out. The house seemed alive, its wooden walls breathing and stretching, hallways stretching infinitely. Whispered voices echoed from the darkness, promising safety if only they would stay. Lisa begged to believe them, but Mark knew better. The house didn't want guests. It wanted to feed. In the basement, they found dozens of old photographs pinned to the walls, faded and torn, showing previous victims, smiling faces frozen in time, now lost forever. Among them was a picture of Emma, eyes wide with fear. Mark's resolve hardened. They needed to escape before the house claimed them too. At midnight, the house's hunger grew stronger. The walls began to move, creaking and groaning as teeth-like wooden spikes sprouted from the floor. Mark grabbed Lisa's hand, pulling her through narrow crawl spaces and hidden passages, desperate to find the original front door. But the house played tricks. Corridors looped endlessly. Shadows stretched into impossible shapes. A cold hand brushed Mark's arm, pulling him toward a hidden opening. Lisa fought back, but Mark was dragged inside a dark wall, swallowed without a sound. Lisa was alone. With tears streaming, she ran blindly through the twisting maze, the walls whispering her name. Exhausted, she stumbled into the grand hall where the front door stood open, a sliver of moonlight spilling inside. She didn't hesitate, sprinting toward freedom. As she crossed the threshold, the house let out a terrible, bone-chilling roar. Behind her, the door slammed shut, and the walls throbbed as if feeding on her fear. Lisa collapsed outside, gasping for air. She looked back once, seeing the windows glow faintly with a sinister red light. The house had fed again, and it was waiting for the next curious soul to come inside. Months later, the Blackwood house still stood, silent and brooding in the forest. Search parties found no sign of Emma, Mark, or Jason. No trace of their desperate struggle or cries for help. Only their cameras and belongings remained, discarded like forgotten toys. Locals say the house is cursed, alive with a hunger that can never be sated. Those who venture too close hear the walls whispering, feel cold hands brushing their skin, and some say they see faces trapped forever behind the warped wooden panels, faces pleading for release but doomed to be consumed, lost forever to the house that eats. The Whitmore mansion stood on the edge of rural Pennsylvania, its blackened windows staring out at the forest like the empty sockets of a skull. Locals swore the place was cursed. They told stories about people who entered and never came back, about the walls moving like a living creature after midnight, trapping anyone foolish enough to stay. Most dismissed it as small-town ghost lore, but to me, it was the perfect chance to prove everyone wrong. I'd been running a small horror exploration channel on YouTube, and I wanted a real scare, something that would pull in views. So on a cold October evening, I packed my camera, flashlight, and sleeping bag, determined to spend the night inside the mansion. I didn't believe in shifting houses, but by the time the sun rose, I'd learned just how alive a house could be. The driveway was nothing but cracked gravel and weeds. My car's headlight swept over the massive silhouette of the Whitmore mansion, revealing peeling paint and warped wood. A cold wind howled through broken shutters, making the place seem almost awake. I parked and stepped out into the biting air. The front doors loomed at least 10 feet high, their faded red paint flaking under my touch. With a groan, one of them swung open on its own. I told myself it was the wind, but a shiver ran up my spine as I stepped inside. The entry hall was enormous, wide staircase curving upward into darkness, a chandelier hanging from a chain so rusted it looked ready to snap. My boots clicked on the marble floor, each step echoing far longer than it should have. The air smelled of dust and something faintly metallic. I explored for hours. The dining hall still had a long table, set with dishes coated in grime. The study was lined with books whose pages crumbled at the touch. Upstairs, bedrooms lay in decay, broken beds, torn curtains, and dressers left open as if someone had left in a hurry. At 11:30 p.m., I returned to the first floor and spread my sleeping bag in the drawing room. I figured I'd get some rest before midnight, before the time the so-called shifting was supposed to happen. Outside, the forest swayed in the wind. Inside, it was utterly still. I woke to a sound. Not the creak of settling wood, but something heavier like furniture scraping across a floor. I sat up, heart pounding, and checked my phone. 12:01 a.m. My flashlight beam cut across the room, and I froze. The doorway I had walked through earlier wasn't there anymore. In its place was a wall. I stood, panic clawing at my chest, and ran to the opposite side of the room, expecting the hall to be there. Instead, I found a narrow corridor I didn't remember. The scraping sound came again, closer this time. I followed the corridor, hoping it led to the entry hall, but it twisted sharply, then again, leading me deeper into the house. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing strange symbols carved into the wood beneath. At some point, I realized I was walking in circles. I passed the same toppled chair twice, but the walls around it kept changing, sometimes wood-paneled, sometimes brick, sometimes plaster. My flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. Stay. I spun around, but no one was there. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed as I searched for an exit. Every time I turned a corner, the layout was different. I came to a hallway lined with mirrors, each one warped and cloudy. My reflection lagged behind my movements by a second, then smiled when I didn't. I smashed one of the mirrors with my flashlight. Behind it was not a wall, but another room, lit by a single candle. I climbed through the jagged glass frame, cutting my hand in the process. Inside the candlelit room was a small wooden table, and on it, 3 framed photographs. Each showed a different person, a young woman, an older man, and a boy around 12. All of them looked terrified, eyes wide as if staring at something behind the photographer. My stomach dropped when I noticed the background in all 3 photos. It was the exact room I was standing in. The candle blew out. Darkness swallowed me whole. I turned on my flashlight, but its beam barely reached a few feet ahead. From somewhere deep in the house, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I ran. Hallways twisted under my feet, doors opened into brick walls, and stairs led to ceilings. The house was moving faster now, almost as if it was guiding me somewhere. My lungs burned, my legs shook, but I couldn't stop. Then I entered a room I hadn't seen before. It was massive, circular, with walls lined in faded red velvet. In the center stood a grand 4-poster bed. Lying on it, pale as wax, was the boy from the photograph. His eyes darted toward me, and he opened his mouth to speak, but before a sound came out, the walls behind me slammed shut. The floor trembled, and the bed began to sink into it, dragging the boy down. I lunged forward to grab him, but an invisible force shoved me back so hard I hit the wall. When I looked again, the bed and the boy were gone. The room began to change around me. The red velvet walls faded into rotting wood, the floorboards curling upward like claws. I could feel the house breathing, slow, steady, each exhale rattling through the walls. In the corner, a door appeared where there hadn't been one before. I didn't hesitate. I threw it open and found myself in the entry hall again, the front doors just ahead. Relief surged through me, but when I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Behind me, footsteps echoed. I turned and saw shapes emerging from the shadows, figures with empty eyes and slack jaws, their skin grey and cracked like old plaster. They moved slowly, but I could feel the air thickening, pressing me toward them. I slammed my shoulder into the door. Twice. On the third try, it burst open, and I stumbled out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I looked back once, just in time to see the front doors of the Whitmore mansion swing shut on their own. The footage from my camera was mostly static, though a few frames showed warped hallways and shadowy figures. I posted the video online, but most viewers thought it was staged. Only one comment stood out, a username I didn't recognize. It read, "You left the door open. We can find you now." I moved out of Pennsylvania a week later. But some nights, when I wake in the dark, I swear my bedroom door is in a different place than it was the night before. When Emily and Mark Thompson bought the old farmhouse on the outskirts of Vermont, they were eager to escape city life and start fresh. The house was a rambling two-story with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch, standing lonely at the edge of thick woods. It had been empty for years, and though it looked like a fixer-upper, Emily was enchanted by its rustic charm. But the realtor gave them a warning they couldn't ignore. The attic door was sealed shut, nailed, and locked tight, and no one had dared open it in decades. "Some things are better left alone," she said quietly, casting a nervous glance at the roofline. They had laughed it off, thinking it was just superstition. But from the very first night, the house seemed to hum with something sinister. Emily was the first to notice the lullabies. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, a faint melody floating down from the attic, like a ghostly mother singing to a child long gone. The lullabies came in the dead of night, soft and sorrowful but with an undertone that chilled her to the bone. She'd lie awake, frozen, listening as the song filled the old wooden beams. Mark dismissed it as the creaking of the house or wind sneaking through cracks. But Emily knew better. Nights passed, and the lullabies grew louder, more desperate. Sometimes, she could swear she heard a soft, childlike giggle mingling with the tune, laughing at her, beckoning her. One night, Emily woke to a scratching sound, as if tiny fingernails were clawing from the other side of the attic door. She shivered and pulled the covers tight, unwilling to face what might be trapped up there. The next day, Emily tried to pry the door open. The nails were rusty but strong, almost as if someone had sealed it with an unnatural force. Mark tried to calm her fears, insisting they focus on fixing the kitchen instead. But Emily's unease grew. The air around the door seemed colder, as if the house was breathing frost. Curious and desperate for answers, Emily went to visit Mrs. Caldwell, the elderly neighbor known for her knowledge of local law. When Emily told her about the lullabies and the sealed attic, Mrs. Caldwell's eyes darkened. She told a chilling story. Decades ago, the farmhouse had belonged to the Whitman family. Their infant daughter had died mysteriously, and in her grief, the mother had sealed off the nursery in the attic, locking away the crib and the child's toys. Since then, no one dared enter the attic, for the house seemed to trap the child's restless spirit, singing its mournful lullabies to anyone who would listen. Many who stayed reported nightmares, waking to find shadowy figures watching them from the corners of their rooms. That night, the lullabies began anew, louder and more agonized. Emily lay frozen in bed, unable to look away as shadowy shapes crept along the walls and the temperature plummeted. The door to the attic suddenly creaked open by itself, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. Compelled by terror and curiosity, Emily crept up the narrow stairs alone. The attic was suffocatingly cold and dark, filled with forgotten furniture draped in white sheets and cracked toys scattered on the dusty floor. In the far corner stood an ancient cradle, rocking slowly despite the still air. The lullaby echoed, surrounding Emily like a shroud. She saw a flicker, a small pale figure with hollow eyes and tangled hair staring at her. The child's face was twisted in sadness, her mouth opening to sing the haunting song once more. Emily tried to flee, but the door slammed shut behind her, locking her in complete darkness. She stumbled, heart hammering, her breath visible in the freezing air. Suddenly, the music box from the floor began to play by itself, its chilling melody intertwining with the lullabies. The little girl's ghost appeared again, reaching out with cold, transparent hands. Emily screamed, struggling to break free, but the spectral child whispered, "Stay with me forever." The walls seemed to pulse, closing in as ghostly hands emerged, clawing and pulling at Emily's clothes and hair. She fought with all her strength, tears streaming down her face, until the door finally burst open. She tumbled down the stairs and fled into the night, the lullaby ringing in her ears long after she reached safety. Mark searched the next day, but the attic door was sealed again, the padlock mysteriously replaced. Emily never returned to the house, and rumors spread that anyone who dared open the nursery never came back the same. Locals say if you pass by on a quiet night, you can still hear the soft lullabies drifting from the attic, calling for a new child to join the restless spirit trapped inside. When Daniel and Rachel Morgan purchased the old Harrington house in upstate New York, they were convinced they had finally found the perfect place to call home. The two-story Victorian, nestled on the edge of a quiet forest, had all the charm they desired: a wraparound porch with weathered wooden railings, stained glass windows that caught the morning sun in brilliant colors, and enough space inside for the family they hoped to start. The realtor had mentioned the house came with a bit of history, but assured them nothing unusual beyond rumors of a family who had abruptly left decades ago. For Daniel, leaving behind his stressful corporate career meant starting fresh in a peaceful setting, while Rachel saw the house as the sanctuary they'd been dreaming of for years. Neither of them gave much thought to the subtle unease the realtor's glance held as she handed over the keys. Moving in on a bright Saturday, the air inside the Harrington house carried a faint scent, dust mixed with something sweet, like old perfume that lingered long after its wearer was gone. They spent the day unpacking, arranging their belongings and imagining their future together, but as night fell and they finally settled into bed, the house seemed to settle with them. It was then, just as Rachel was drifting towards sleep, that she first heard it, a soft murmur coming from the wall behind their bed. At first, she thought it might be Daniel talking in his sleep, but when she turned toward him, he was breathing deeply and evenly. The sound was faint and muffled, like someone whispering through a mouthful of cloth. Her heart quickened as she sat up, straining to catch the words, which remained just out of reach, a rhythmic, hurried conversation she couldn't quite understand. "Daniel, do you hear that?" she whispered. He stirred but denied hearing anything, suggesting it was just the pipes creaking in an old house. Still, Rachel found herself unable to fall asleep, the uneasy whispers echoing in her mind long after silence returned. By the third night, Daniel could no longer ignore the voices. Sitting in the living room amid the half-unpacked boxes, the faint murmurs began again. This time, the words were clearer, chilling in their desperation. "Still here, I can't leave." Daniel's head snapped toward the wall, eyes wide. Rachel nodded, her face pale. They pressed their ears against the faded wallpaper and realized the voices were definitely coming from inside the walls. They were layered and overlapping, male, female, even what sounded like a child. Rachel shivered and stepped back. "Maybe there's someone trapped in there," she suggested. Daniel shook his head, though uncertainty crept into his voice. "That's impossible. These walls are solid, no crawl spaces, no ventilation ducts big enough for a person." The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by the faint hum of the refrigerator. The following day, Rachel was tending the small garden when an elderly woman approached from across the street. She introduced herself as Margaret, her voice rough but kind. "You're the new folks, hey," she said. Rachel smiled and confirmed. Margaret glanced at the Harrington house and then back at Rachel. "That place hasn't held tenants long since the Johnson family," she said softly. "You should be careful. At night, you might hear things. Don't listen too closely." Rachel's stomach tightened. "Why?" she asked. Margaret lowered her voice further and whispered, "Because they want you to join them." Before Rachel could press for more, Margaret turned and walked away, muttering under her breath. That night, Daniel, still skeptical, set up an old audio recorder in the living room hoping to capture some evidence of the strange sounds. The next morning, they played back the recording while eating breakfast. For hours, the tape was silent except for the usual ambient noises, until suddenly at 2:13 a.m., faint voices emerged from the static, whispering fragmented phrases like "they can't hear us yet" and "find the key." Then, a child's distant giggle echoed through the recording, making Rachel's blood run cold. Daniel tried to rationalize it as radio interference, but Rachel refused to accept such an explanation. Over the following days, the whispers grew louder and more insistent, sometimes calling Rachel's name directly. One stormy evening, a particularly loud whisper seemed to beckon them toward the basement. The air there was damp and heavy with mildew. Behind an old, rotting wardrobe, Daniel noticed a section of wall that sounded hollow when he tapped it. With some effort, they pried away the broken wood and uncovered a narrow, dust-filled passage. Their flashlights barely penetrated the darkness as they stepped inside. The passage ended in a tiny hidden room, containing just a rusted metal bed frame, a cracked porcelain doll, and a stack of yellowed newspapers. The headlines were chilling: "Harrington family missing, police search continues," and neighbors report strange noises from residents. The articles detailed how, in 1963, the Harrington family, a mother, father, and their young daughter, had vanished without a trace. Neighbors reported hearing screaming in the nights that followed, but the police never found any bodies. Returning upstairs, the whispers seemed to envelop the entire house, no longer faint but echoing from every wall, floor, and ceiling, claiming "you found us" and promising "we can be together now." Grabbing Rachel's hand, Daniel insisted they leave immediately. However, the front and back doors refused to budge, and all the windows appeared to be sealed shut as if glued in place. The lights flickered, and in the brief moments of darkness, Rachel thought she saw translucent, anguished figures lurking silently in the corners of rooms. They fled upstairs, hoping to find another escape route, but the whispers swelled into a deafening chorus demanding they stay forever. Daniel forced open the master bedroom door but froze at the sight before him. The bed was no longer theirs, it was the rusted frame from the hidden room in the basement. On it lay three pale figures, a man, a woman, and a little girl, who simultaneously opened their eyes, revealing endless blackness within. Rachel screamed as the walls began to close in, the wallpaper stretching like living skin. Cold, thin hands emerged from the walls, grabbing at their clothes, hair, and skin with terrifying strength. Daniel shoved Rachel toward the hall, shouting for her to run. She stumbled, scrambling to her feet, and sprinted to the front door, which this time opened as if by some unseen force. Gasping for air, Rachel ran into the street, glancing back only once to see Daniel was gone, the house once again silent and dark. The next day, police searched the house but found no sign of Daniel, only Rachel's belongings neatly packed at the foot of the stairs, as if she had never lived there at all. Within a week, Rachel moved to another state, trying to escape the nightmare. Yet, late at night, she still swears she hears Daniel's voice, not from the phone, not from outside, but coming from the walls themselves.